Dun, 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 dun. You see me now, the veteran of the OGL wars. Hello and welcome. It's time to put on my soothing yet spooky voice. It's time for another Tales from the Loop. Tales from the deep, dark, far end of the tabletop role-playing game controversy industry. Because today we're going to look at some alternative takes on what happened in January. Today we're going to explore some questionable facts, some controversy. Today we're going to play devil's advocate. So stand back, sit down, take a breather, get a sip of your favorite beverage. Because let's take a look at some of these posts I've seen regarding the 2023 January OGL trash fire that has shook the industry up. So, if you're not aware of what happened at the beginning of the month of January, certain information came to light regarding the plans Wizards of the Coast had for the future of Dungeons & Dragons, with the 2024 50th anniversary coming up and 6th edition / Open D&D rolling right along. Now, most of these plans should not have been a surprise to anyone because Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro had been talking about it for the past 4 years. I know some people don't believe that, and that's just me spouting off my token controversy, and maybe that's true. Maybe the facts I have are lies. But we do know that something happened, and it caused an entire gaming industry to rise up and go, yeah, no, you're not going to do that, Wizards of the Coast. But now, as things seem to be temporarily settled, and Wizards of the Coast seems to be temporarily retreating, and for as far as we know, 5e and 5.1 and Open D&D /6e are now protected by the new SRD Creative Commons, which supposedly Wizards of the Coast can't change, and that everything Wizards of the Coast does going forward will be under this new 5.1 SRD, because as of now, Open D&D /6th edition is no longer a new edition. It's just an extension of what they've already done, which means I guess we don't need a new player's handbook then, right? But of course, despite the fact for them saying it's going to be a new edition that's backwards compatible, now it's not a new edition. It's just an expansion, an extension, a revision, a rewriting. It's 5.1. It's not 6e. It's not Open D&D. It's just one ring to rule them all. So first controversy. Did Wizards of the Coast plan this? Now, this is a controversy we've explored before, and I've been told that you don't know what you're talking about. That's stupid. Nobody would do that. Except repeatedly, we've seen Wizards of the Coast do this. So, was this planned? Did Wizards of the Coast leak the information on purpose in order to cause this amazing response, knowing that then whatever they said next would be a okay alternative to what they said initially? Except every time in the past that Wizards of the Coast has done something that people have said, oh, they planned it, the response was almost instantaneous. We could look at the response from Wizards of the Coast to the Hadozi, the racist space apes. Spelljammer came out. Controversy regarding racist space monkeys came out. Within 24 hours, Wizards of the Coast had a response, which led a lot of people to think, well, they planned this, including myself, based upon the fact that they continue to do this. This continues to happen, and then they continue to respond. The OGL 1.1 information came out. 24 hours later, everybody was expecting Wizards of the Coast to respond, and they didn't. They didn't respond for a week, which is unusual in normal circumstances when something like this happens in the real world. But for something to happen to this, like to Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, and for them to go almost 2 weeks without anything resembling a response, that is virtually unheard of. You can look at any other company throughout the history where corporate information was released through a weak leak, and we can go to Marvel because Marvel's the next closest connection. And we look at what happens when Marvel gets leaks out. They either respond to the leak right away or they run with the leak because they know that it was a leak they made on purpose, and then they make fun of us. And they get Tom Holland out and they have the jokes and stuff. So there's a lot of ways companies can respond to situations like this, but history pretty much within 24 to 48 hours from information getting out, company responds. Wizards of the Coast waited a week, which means if they planned it, that's a big play. Controversy number 2, there's no proof. None of the reporters that reported on this did their due diligence, provided alternative takes, provided debates to the contrary, and provided actual proof. There's no proof that Wizards of the Coast released that leak. There's no proof that anybody received the supposed draft copy. And there's no proof that Wizards of the Coast did any of the things they did leading up to them announcing, hey, we're going to have a survey. And hey, the survey isn't getting us the results we want. And hey, you know what? We're just going to put it under Creative Commons, which is probably what we should have done in the first place. Or actually, we should have just not said anything. Which leads to devil advocate moment. Well, what if Wizards of the Coast hadn't said anything? What if there'd never been a leak? People are like, okay, well, the only reason this happened is because of this leak. So if Wizards of the Coast planned it, unusual, because all they had to do was not do anything. Just poop, change, new OGL, new SRD, new system, bam, you can't do anything. That would have been the best course of action, but they didn't do that. Or Wizards of the Coast didn't have to respond at all. Here's a leak. Yeah, we're not going to respond. We're going to keep things as normal. You guys can say whatever you want. What we said we were going to do 3 years ago is still going to happen. So, leak, big deal. It's not like you guys didn't know we were going to do this. What if the leak was a lie? What if Pazio and Kobold Press and the rest of the third-party gaming industry got together at some secret meeting and came up with a Machiavellian-level plot to create a leak, get it out there, and then respond to the leak, ready to pounce on it with we're coming to your rescue with this system. Well, there's a lot of steps in that. First, you'd have to get all the companies that were involved, Troll Lords, Pazio, Kobold Press, Green Ronin, Frog God Games, plus the other countless number of smaller companies to all agree that they were going to do this, to all agree on what the leak would say, and then all agree on the day and time to release the false leak to best take effect of what was going on with Wizards of the Coast. And the only real thing that going on Wizards of the Coast in January was some hemming and hawing about the tyranny of the Dragon Queen and Dragonlance. So January, Wizards of the Coast had a pretty good month. Stock was okay. There was the Magic thing was happening. The Hasbro thing was happening. People are upset about the VTT and the changes that they were suggesting for digital. But for Wizards of the Coast, it was a month. It wasn't a major league month. So if this is true, if somehow the leak was fabricated, how did Pazio, Kobold Press, Troll Lords, Green Ronin all agree to create this? How did they get it out there? And then how did they know how Wizards of the Coast was going to react so that they could have their response ready? Except if they planned this, that means they would have had a response already in the pipe. so they could wait a reasonable amount of time before expressing outrage and saying this is what we were going to do. But they didn't. They waited almost a week, 2 weeks before they said, okay, Wizards of the Coast hasn't gotten in front of this. Wizards of the Coast keeps insulting us. Wizards of the Coast has no care for us. So you know what? We're going to start this thing and see where it goes. And a lot of people are signed up on it. A lot of people, including people that nobody expected to sign up under the org. Now, if they had planned this, they would have already had the play test and the ORC and all the information and all the stuff that we've seen them do ready to go, which means it wouldn't look so haphazard as it does right now. I mean, we still haven't seen anything from Pazio as to what the orc actually is. Well, conspiracy. Pazio often says they're going to do things and then rarely actually do them, which is true. Pazio has made throughout the history of Pathfinder claims of things they were going to address and fix and change, and they never did. But then there's also a history of Pazio actually actively doing the things that they said they were going to do. So, Now, to this date, zero actual proof of the supported claims that the OGL was not a draft version sent out by Wizards of the Coast for comment. Nameless third parties claim they were told to sign it, but there's no emails or proof that show that this ever happened. Wizards of the Coast claims that it was a draft, except the reverse claim is, well, if it was a draft, why did it have a signature space on it? And why didn't it say draft? Because every other point in the history of the bureaucracy of corporate America, if a document is sent out and it's a draft, you make very sure that the people reading it know it's a draft. And usually that's because superimposed over every page in big red letters, it says draft, and you do not include a signature line. So why would they say this is bullshit? This never happened. Nobody has this. Why? Who would instigate this lie and why? Where? That's a very big lie. I got a draft. I was told to sign. Oh, but it wasn't a draft. What I got wasn't a draft. Wizards of the Coast. Yes, Wizards of the Coast says, yes, we sent it out, but it was a draft. And if that's true, then people should be saying, yes, I got a draft copy. This is what it says. But no, people are saying, I got this. And nowhere on here does it give me any sense that this is a draft. And the only problem, of course, with that is the fact that the entire history of American corporate America, as soon as the spreading of documents became available and people saw things that were supposedly rock solid, which led to multiple court cases, it is now ingrained to corporate culture that if you send something out that is not 100% official, agreed upon by everybody and their dog, it says draft, and you do not put anywhere on there for somebody to sign. Second, we've actually seen copies of it. People have posted screen caps of it. So if this is all fake, that perpetrated by people like, D&D Shorts and Tanker and the other people who have been all over this, that's a lot of time and energy that these individuals invested to create this fake OGL 1.1 that Wizards of the Coast says, yes, we sent it out. Now, we have individuals, claiming that Wizards of the Coast doesn't read the playtest material, except, of course, then we have Jeremy Crawford talking about how they read the playtest surveys and they showed on the surveys where they were reading the surveys and what they changed in the surveys. Except, of course, we have actual quotes from internal Wizards of the Coast about how Chris Cook and Cynthia Williams see the public and, how much or how little the surveys mean, and multiple individuals claiming that they never saw the surveys don't matter. And then, of course, we have Cynthia's weird Steiner math. The weird Steiner math leads us to go, well, okay, maybe you read a sampling of the surveys, but you couldn't have read all the surveys because the math doesn't add up. So this controversy goes, there are either 13 million or 5 million people on D&D Beyond. So somewhere between 13 million and 5 million people, of those, 40,000 responded to the surveys for one D&D round 1, one D&D round 2, and one D&D round 3. So you take 13 million, and out of that 13 million, you actually have 5 million. And out of that 5 million, you only have 40,000 people who took the survey. And out of those 40,000 people, at least 10% were bots. And another 10% were people who just did the survey twice, 3 times, 4 times. I mean, I did it 4 or 5 different times just to make sure they knew what I had to say. Well, that's cheating, and you shouldn't be able to do that, except you do. And we know that surveys are bolstered, and we know that things like that, especially when they're done online, are prone to bots. So we either have 13 million people who took the survey, or we have 5 million people who are on D&D Beyond. And if you subtract 13 from 5, you get 40,000. But if 40,000, 10% of that is bots, you only get like 35,000. And 35,000 out of 13 million is not 5 million. So Cynthia Williams Steiner math does not add up. So if you truly had 13 million responses to the survey, of which only 40,000 people actually took the survey, and out of that, 10% were bots, and out of that, you only got a certain amount of responses you actually wanted to see because you kept extending the delay date until you got the responses you want. And Wizards of the Coast even quoted multiple times, we're extending the survey date because the survey isn't showing us the results we want. And then you released, cherry-picked the actual results once you reached a certain saturation level of responses you want. And we have seen quotes from Wizards of the Coast saying, yeah, the survey doesn't really matter. We don't really read it. We only take a sampling, which is true. Most surveys, you only take samplings. Nobody goes through each and every one. No computer is going to waste that much of time, energy, marketing, whatever, to go through each and every survey. You go through all the surveys, you look for keywords, you look for responses, you look for percentages, you take a chunk out of the populace for percentages to get that pie chart. And we saw actual documents saying this. So were these fabricated? Did D&D Shorts and Tanker and Venger and all the other people who reported on this get together and agree that we were going to say this without any actual proof and just hope people will run with the stuff and these things that we're showing online were made up? Well, again, that's a lot of time and energy, and that's getting a lot of people to agree to follow with this program and make these copies and pastes and risk the wrath of Wizards of the Coast suing them for libel. If everything D&D Short said is false, if everything Tanker said is false, if everything Time Magazine, Newsweek, Washington Post, Bank of America, Polygon, CNR, all these companies that went in on this said is false, all Wizards of the Coast had to do was say that's lies. Here's what we actually wrote. And by the way, we're now all suing you for libel. But they didn't. So we have more claims about, how there were other people behind this, how this was planned, how this was all some mass conspiracy. I could go through each and every one of these, including, of course, the conspiracy that's being spread about people who were being tormented and being beaten up and told they had to burn their books, and people being told you could not write, play, run, or talk about 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. We've still got that one going around. The sales numbers were made up. The sales numbers, this rumor being circulated that D&D books are just stacked up in warehouses, not moving. except, of course, the numbers show that that is absolutely true. D&D sales for 2022 were abysmal. D&D sales for 2023 are looking abysmal. In fact, there's recently an article posted from, Polygon and Bank of America talking about Hasbro stock, and Washington Post talking about how they're cutting down the amount of stuff they're shipping out this year. Friendly local game stores are not going to get a copy of Keys to the Golden Vault and whatever future products they're getting. They're being sent to the big box. The limited editions of the solid print are being sent to Amazon, being sent to Target, being sent to Walmart, being sent to Barnes and Nobles. FLG, if you get one at all, you're going to get one or maybe 5, and that's all you're ever going to get. You're going to have to pay top price for it over and above, because you're going to have to pay for the Diamond/Alliance prices. And then you're going to be told you have to buy a certain amount of Magic cards to even get those 5. But maybe that's made up. Maybe all those numbers are just lies. Maybe the stock reports I see every week are all part of some vast conspiracy created by D&D Shorts just to get him some likes, shares, and subscribes. And then somehow all these people got together, including people who are actual journalists like Newsweek, the Washington Post, CBS, all the actual journalists who went into this and looked at it and talked to Wizards of the Coast. At no point in time did Wizards of the Coast come forward and say this isn't true. In fact, Wizards of the Coast is now saying, yeah, it was true. It wasn't what we thought, what we wanted to happen, but it's true. In fact, 2020, at the beginning of 2020, the then CEO of Hasbro, during the first part of the year, PulseCon, this is what we're going to do. These are our plans. They've been in black and white. But the conspiracy is, no, there's no proof. There's nothing to say this. There wasn't anything in there about going after cosplay or anything of that. Kobold and Pazio planned all this because they're profiting off of this. Except we don't live in that world. We live in the real world. We live in the real world of the internet. We live in the real world of lawyers and attorneys and political blah, 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 and bureaucracy and how corporate America works. And you could fault Wizards of the Coast all you want for all the multiple mistakes they make. And you could look at all these things and say, yeah, well, they're just a bunch of geeks. But even Wizards of the Coast on their worst day is a part of Hasbro. I think far too many people forget that and think Wizards of the Coast is its own individual, which has no oversight. Hasbro has millions of dollars worth of individuals employed to make sure things like this don't happen. And when things like this do happen, they have millions of dollars of individuals employed whose job it is to jump on this as quickly as possible, to pursue corporate espionage lawsuits, and to go after these people when it happens. So if the leak was made on Monday, the very first leak, any other company, with exception of Marvel, because now they run with their leaks, but in the old days, before Tom Holland, if corporate information was leaked, that's corporate espionage. And there are multiple laws against that, and multiple things Wizards of the Coast could have done and should be doing right now. I don't see Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro going after anybody. I don't see any corporate espionage lawsuits. I don't see any cease and desist letters being sent. If this actually happened, then and was being released, then how come Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro isn't doing these things? Because that's corporate espionage. And if it's made up, if this was all a lie, if the OGL 1.1 we saw, if the documents we saw, if all the quotes we saw, if all the interviews we heard was all some fabricated master plan on the part of people like, D&D Shorts, then wouldn't have the actual news companies that responded to this, like CBS, Wall Street Journal, Bank of America, Polygon, done due diligence and gone after these, tried to confirm whether it's true or not. All Wizards of the Coast had to do, if this was all BS, is come forward the very next day, show the actual documents, address the BS, address the leak, and make a statement like, we are aware this happened, we are dealing with it, moving forward, these are the steps we're going to take, and this is how we're going to respond. And the individuals responsible for this leak will be found out. And if it was made up, if it's all a lie, well, first we'd have to know how all these individuals got together to create this lie, and how D&D Shorts and Pazio and Kobold were all together with Kobold and CNN and CBC and whoever else, and all these people got together and created this conspiracy and released this fake thing so they can run with it. And then for whatever reasons, Wizards of the Coast did not do what every other company in the history of this type of event has done and get ahead of it. Hasbro did not have their multi-million-dollar legal team come out on Tuesday and go, nope, this is not true, or this leak is completely inappropriate. That is not the information as it stands. That is all bullshit. Please ignore this. Anybody who continues to report on this, we will send cease and desist letters. Because either you're looking at corporate espionage, which Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro has individuals in place to address and legal backup to deal with this, or you're dealing with they did it on purpose, which, if they did it on purpose, like people said they did the Hadozi on purpose or all the other previous conspiracies on purpose, they would have had something in place. So within the next 24 hours, Crawford or whoever could come out and say, oh, we see your concerns. We're sorry this happened. The individual who leaked this is being dealt with. Going forward, we're going to have more clarity and more open perception of our steps with the OGL. And this is not the OGL we have planned for one D&D. And if this was all made up, if this was all some vast BS created by Pazio and Kobold and D&D Shorts and the other individuals who jumped on it from day one, then again, all Wizards of the Coast had to do is get a representative from Hasbro to make a cease and desist process available, and to have a public relations individual, whoever that may be, whether it be Kyle, Crawford, Greg, Perkins, Cindy from accounting, whoever, Professor Connie Chan, come forward either in video or in print within 24 hours of the leak and address the fact that the leak was false. And when the second series of accusations were being made and the second series of documents were being published, if those were fake, then all Wizards of the Coast had to do is get Hasbro's legal team to send out a cease and desist and say, again, let's get ahead of this. And have somebody from legal, have somebody from public relations, whether it be Crawford or Brink or Greg or Cindy or whoever, come forward and in typical corporate speech, get ahead of it. Apologize, make sure everybody knew it wasn't true, address the fact that this happened and they are taking the proper responses, and then again, cease and desist. And when the third round came out, and Wizards of the Coast is now going, oh yeah, that's what we did. We didn't mean to. This is actually what we meant to do. Well, by then, 2 weeks had already passed. And again, Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro Legal could have come forward and taken all the steps that every other corporation in the world has taken when something like this happens to get ahead of it, to do damage control, and then to address the individuals who leaked it with cease and desist lawsuits. Now, we don't know if going forward, Hasbro's going to go after D&D Shorts. Hasbro's going to go after all the people who leak this. After if Hasbro's going to do a major house cleaning because this happened, except, of course, if you look at the Wizards of the Coast Help Wanted site, you see that at least 60 people within Wizards of the Coast are about to lose their jobs. Kyle probably being one of them, Crawford probably being another. So sometime between January and some future, 60 members of the Wizards of the Coast family are going to be replaced by 60 new individuals. And Kyle, it's pretty obvious Kyle's days with Wizards of the Coast are numbered because Kyle's being sent out as the scapegoat, the stalking horse. Kyle's being sent out to pad Wizards of the Coast public relations, pad his own resume, and take all the negativity that we have for Wizards of the Coast right now and have it focused on him, while Wizards of the Coast can continue to do stuff and go, look at Kyle, look at Kyle, look at Kyle, where we're doing this over here, look at Kyle. And Hasbro could go after D&D shorts in the future. I'm kind of surprised they haven't already. That's what they pay their legal department for, to get ahead of these things immediately. They could go after Pazio and Kobold and all these other individuals if they are somehow responsible, if there was some Machiavellian level conspiracy to somehow, using ancient mathematical formulas, know that the exact day and time to release the leak to do the most damage. Hasbro has a multi-million-dollar worldwide legal department in place for just such things. So the problem with all these conspiracies is Hasbro exists. Wizards of the Coast is not some individual unique company on an island with no safety nets, with no legal departments, just a bunch of guys throwing D&D out in the air and seeing what happened. No, they are part of a machine, of a fine-tuned machine, a multi-part machine with multiple departments, multiple individuals, multiple people, multiple things in play to make sure things like this do not happen. Because at the end of the day, Wizards of the Coast's job is to make Hasbro money. And Hasbro knows they are not doing or creating anything that anybody else can't do or create. All Hasbro can do is make sure they make the best product they can to make sure that the money people are spending go into their pockets. And that's Wizards of the Coast's job, to make money off of these licenses. And if that is ever being threatened, there is a multiple member organization in place to prevent this. So if things happen the way these conspiracies are claiming it happened, and if all these statements were never made, and despite everything we've seen, everything we've heard, everything we've been told up to and including the interviews with Kyle, which pretty much say the same things we were saying from day one, if this is all some vast conspiracy created by Pazio and Kobold and D&D shorts, Tuesday, all they had to do was have legal come out and say, nope. We hear what you're saying. We see this. It's not true. It never happened. This is what happened. This is what the OGL says. This is what we're doing in the future. You guys know we're going to do this because we've been talking about it for almost 4 years. And the individuals who leaked it, the legal ramifications for those actions are being pursued. That's it. If even one iota of all this is true, all Hasbro had to do was come forward. And if even one iota of all this stuff about people being tortured and persecuted and all these other things, and people being told they can't play, they can't run, they can't have D&D, they can't own D&D, if there was even one iota of that was true, again, there are legal things in place to make sure you're protected. And Hasbro would not want people saying that. Hasbro would, of course, want people to say, no, play 5e, buy our shit. So while some of these conspiracies sound very logical, And maybe, to say that D&D Shorts didn't use this as a chance to increase his recognizability, of course he did. At the end of the day, that's his job. Just like it's my job to milk the press to get as much responses as I can. Just like it's Jeannie D's job to do what she does in order to make the most money she can. Just like it's Critical Role's job. At the end of the day, this is a job. This is what we do. So I'm not going to say he didn't pad it. I'm not going to say he didn't play a little emotional strings. Of course he did. We all do. That's how press works. Now let's see some responses from the idiots. This guy says, when in doubt, play D6. I absolutely 100% agree with that. The best solution to all this OGL nonsense is to play other games. The problem with actual conspiracies is that the more people are involved, the harder it is to keep secret. Exactly. If this was this true multi-level Hail Hydra Machiavellian conspiracy put together by all these individuals, all it had to do was one, person in the bathroom overhearing and then typing on their Twitter to their mom. Guess what? And yeah, it's impossible to keep a secret in today's day. What is certainty that is no one should trust a word they say, especially since they refuse to state that 1.0 is irrevocable. No, I'm going to say this again, not that I want to simp for Wizards of the Coast, but it's not like this is a surprise, guys. And it's sort of weird how many people don't listen when I say this, even though the numbers and the facts are there. Hasbro told you in 2020 what they were going to do. Hasbro told you at the end of in the middle of 2022 what they were going to do. Hasbro told you at the beginning of 2023 what they were going to do. So either Wizards of the Coast Hasbros are incompetent or evil, or that's all a conspiracy would entail. Wizards of the Coast is definitely incompetent. Hasbro's showing more and more incompetence, but at the end of the day, again, it doesn't matter. They have a very competent legal department in place to deal with these things. And in a normal situation, if at day A, a corporate secret is released from an actual real corporation, like, I don't know, Coke, by the end of that day or the beginning of next day, the legal department would have had a response and public relations would have had a response. The most likely scenario is that Wizards of the Coast was going to reveal 1.1 on the initiation date of January 13th. They had been talking about that they were going to release something on January 13th, since the NDA regarding all previous stuff ended on January 4th. The leak was unattended, and the backlash from the usual 5e psychopaths was unanticipated. The leak was unattended. Yes, the leak happened. We don't know how. We don't know why. We know it was leaked. And then the fact that we responded the usual way we did, that was probably unanticipated. I don't think there was any way they could have anticipated what actually happened. So if it was planned, they would have known it was coming. And the fact that there are still people saying ridiculous things about it, even to this day, and the fact that people are receiving death threats and all this other crap about, the torment and how it was worse than the Nazis and they're coming to get your DM screen and all that rest of the stuff. Yeah, that's just 5e psychopaths looking for attention. At the end of the day, Wizards of the Coast was going to change D&D. 6th edition was coming up in 2024. They made it very clear there was going to be new SRD, new OGL, new rules. They had to, because the game had evolved and changed. There was new shit. So, of course, they're going to have to make a new SRD, especially if they were going to make it backwards compatible. Of course, they had to make a new OGL because the shit changed. There's a whole bunch of new shit. Now, we don't know what they had planned, but knowing Wizards of the Coast and knowing, on paper, things Wizards of the Coast does make sense. Probably 90% of the stuff we saw was at least considered. And on some level, 90% of the stuff we saw makes sense. It was implemented stupidity. And we could bash this back and forth. We could play out truths. We could play out lies. We can play out conspiracies. We could talk about this till they're blue in the face. We've already talked about it for 40 minutes longer than I intended to. Despite all these pages, it really breaks down to what I started with from the first place. No matter what version of this is true, even if even some aspect of it, then any other normal situation, legal would have gotten ahead of it by the end of the first day or the beginning of the second. But the fact that there was no response from Hasbro, no response from Wizards of the Coast, meanwhile, other people were jumping on this like sharks on chum, shows that, yeah, no, they had no idea that this was going to happen, and they were completely unprepared how to deal with it, which goes back to the incompetence and the incompetence of Hasbro Legal, because Hasbro Legal should have gotten ahead of it. So, yeah, they were completely unprepared. And plus, it gives them an excuse to clean house. And also, Hasbro kind of has a history of just not saying things whenever controversy shows up at their door, and using Wizards of the Coast as their scapegoat. Right now, Wizards of the Coast's job is to take all the bad press so Hasbro can focus on the real money that they're losing. Because that D&D money they're losing is nothing compared to that Power Ranger and Peppa Pig money they're losing. That's what they're concerned about. That Chinese market, the Asian market, the fact that the shareholders are angry at them. Fuck D&D. Anyways, that's it. If you agree with anything I said, let me know. If you don't agree with me, let me know. D&D Shorts, if you're out there, man, I support you. I think everything you said is real. I think it happened, and I hope nothing bad happens to you for saying this. To anybody else who risks their jobs and are receiving the death threats, I want you to know we appreciate you. And we want to know that you guys are just doing your jobs, and this got way out of hand. And the fact that there's individuals out there that are continuing to use this as a reason to just make this more angry and hateful than it already was. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you're all just doing your jobs, and you're all just trying to keep a roof over your head. And Hasbro's going to Hasbro, and Wizards of the Coast is going to Wizards of the Coast. And this, I mean, I'm glad something positive is coming out of this, and the gaming industry is re-energized. But the negativity, you know, and the hate and the anger, that's, you know, something we never like to see. What is the future for Wizards of the Coast? Well, we'll find out in 2027. What is the future for Hasbro? We'll find out in a couple days, because Q4 is about to be released. So, yeah. I hope you all appreciated this. If you do, please like, please share, please subscribe. Please support the OGGM Adventures. Please help me reach 2,000 subs by April 1st. Check out my merch available at Big Geek Emporium. Check out my new affiliate, Korean Snack Box, and get 5% off your first purchase. I have some samples to show you, but for some reason they haven't sent me any. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's just a fucking game. Go out and play your game your way, and don't let anybody else, you know, really bring you down, because just go outside, have an ice cream. It's just a silly game about elves in the woods. Okay? So I've addressed the conspiracies. I'm not going to address them again. I know what I think is real. I know what I think is BS. I know what I think happened. I know what I think should have happened. Am I right? Am I wrong? Does it matter? No, we've talked about this enough. Moving on. Till next time, please like, please share, please subscribe. Please check out DM Kurt, because he told me I had to upsell him because I lost the bet. So yes, DM Kurt, D&D Beyond did crash. Therefore, I have to give you a shout out. Subscribe to DM Kurt. Help him reach 1,000 subs and get monetized. Till next time, get off my land, you damn marks.